Take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
So I want to talk a little bit about Joe Rogan here, because lately he's been popping up more and more with disagreements about Trump's immigration policy. And these are tepid disagreements. Joe Rogan is rare to take a firm stance on anything. Except back in the day, there's a famous clip of him where he's defending immigrants, and he's defending, mothers and women and children that are being deported, or that are being punished for trying to come into America. And this was during the previous Trump era, where essentially we were in the same place that we're at now, but that version of it, the earlier version of it, in the first Trump presidency, where it was like the barbarity of the immigration policy of Donald Trump was becoming clear to people, right? There's what he sells to you in the campaign, which is usually pretty explicit, but then there's what that actually looks like in practice. And so now we're at that same phase, and last time that evoked, a lot of emotion in Joe Rogan, and it made him want to make the point that if you are looking at a woman, a mother and her child who are trying to come to America for a better life, or a mother, a father, and a child, and you are trying to tell them that they can't come in here and that we don't want them, that you're not on the team, and that you have no heart, essentially, and that you don't support what America is supposed to be about. And I think to any extent that America is a redeemable place, it is because of the fact that it has opened its doors to so many different kinds of people. And while there are so many restrictions on the freedoms that those people actually have in practice, and those restrictions have always been there, and various sort of like torture obstacle courses that poor people have to jump through in this country in order to survive, the fact that America is a place where that people can come to, and that on paper America described itself as a place that people can immigrate to and coexist with others who came here for the same reason. That is, I think, one of the core redeemable qualities of America, if there are any. And Joe Rogan seems to have a sense of that as well. But what has happened in the meantime is that some kind of distortion happened at some point during the Biden administration, and I guess the tail end of Trump, but really it came post-COVID. The post-COVID media environment combined with the Democratic president, let alone Biden, who was so easy for people to see as just a hollow, paper-thin, sorry excuse for a president. And so what that created was, I think, an overarching skepticism of any information that people had taken in over the course of several years. And if going into COVID, you did not get yourself extremely grounded about, what you know to be true, what type of information you're looking for, what type of things claiming to be information that you're not going to take any interest in, what type of media figures you have no interest in listening to, what type of media figures and what type of political points that people are making are you willing to entertain in order to find some semblance of truth and maintain your sanity. I think a lot of these skeptical people who want to be skeptical of the mainstream narrative and mainstream science and that sort of thing, all of us know people in our life who are like that. And maybe years ago, before everything became so politicized, those people might have been a little bit more normal to interact with. There are plenty of people who have that impulse, and many of us on the left have that impulse ourselves, skepticism of authority. But what happened is some of these people didn't have the right grounding going into it in terms of what facts are and what facts aren't. And so they drove themselves insane. And Joe Rogan is the perfect example of this, and the example of like just how slow and sure this process is, because he's talking about these things every day. He has experts on. Sometimes he has a bunch of fucking quacks and losers, more so quacks and losers than experts, but he's talked to some really fucking smart people over the years. And the thing that annoys me the most about Joe Rogan is that he's talked to people on all of these subjects, whether it's vaccines, immigration. He's talked to people that know their shit on all types of political subjects, and he never retains any of that. He only retains the shit from idiots, because he's never noticed that pattern, that the people who say the things that are the most colorful and the most interesting and the most intriguing and mysterious, those are the things that stick with you the most. And so it's easy to mistake that for something that has a bigger kernel of truth than what it actually does. And so Joe Rogan, through following his own sort of lazy sense of curiosity over the years, has driven himself more and more into this rabbit hole of wanting to be the skeptic, wanting to be the truth teller and the person who's really sniffing out the truth, but also not having the commitment to the truth to really follow through on that, even in like micro moments. And so the result is a hodgepodge of crackpots, half experts, half-assed questions, sometimes very in-depth interviews, but the way it's presented is in a way that favors laundering bullshit. And so in that environment that Joe Rogan himself created and is the head of, he has driven himself more and more into this narrative that Trump was always right about immigration, I guess, because really this is a change of mind. It's a change of heart that he's had. He used to talk about immigration differently than he does. But anyway, before I go any further, I'll play this clip. This is not that recently. This is from maybe a week ago. And there's been more things that Joe Rogan has said since then. I'm only going to play this clip, though, because this gets to the point of it, and then we'll talk about the rest of it, because this isn't really about Joe Rogan, but more so the media environment that has allowed what we're seeing. So check this out.
You got to get scared that people who are not criminals are getting like lassoed up and deported and sent to like El Salvador prisons. This is kind of crazy that could be possible. That's horrific, and that's bad for the cause. Like, the cause is let's get the gang members out. Everybody agrees, but let's not innocent gay hairdressers get lumped up with the gangs, and then like how long before that guy can get out? Can we figure out how to get him out? Is there any plan in place to alert the authorities that they've made a horrible mistake?
So here you see Joe Rogan kind of earnestly working his way through the idea that it's bad for people to be arrested and deported with no type of due process. And the question is, how did we get to this point? Because you and I made this point in the last video. You and I, dear listener, we knew that empowering Donald Trump to do mass deportations would be exactly what it is right now, and has the potential to be much worse, which is, you can't mass deport people. You don't have mass deportations without some kind of mass roundup activity. Like, people really just never took themselves through this because they allowed themselves to take in sources of information that were telling them repetitively, repetition is important, that these migrants are coming in and they're criminals and they're committing such crimes at such levels, such scale. We have such a scale. So many of them are here that it warrants a mass deportation process. Somehow, Donald Trump sold the American public on that. Enough of them that not only did he win the election with a plurality for the popular vote, but also people like Joe Rogan, many commentators, a certain percentage of them, just straight up grifters who are willing to just say what Trump says, but another portion of them that aren't, and were just earnestly convinced by this. And so they repeat it to their followers, and then now you have a media environment, much like Nazi Germany, very similar to Nazi Germany leading up to Hitler's final solution, you have a media environment that is awash in the certainty that a certain group of people are committing crimes at scale. They are here in massive numbers. None of them were here a couple years ago. All of them illegally migrated here. None of them have jobs. None of them are... I mean, that's what you have to accept in order to justify mass deportations in your mind. And so now we're at a point where people are starting to see the reality of that a little bit. And more recently, Joe Rogan was talking about due process and how it's bad that due process is being, like, there's a reason it exists, and you can't just be deporting people without due process, or you can't be arresting people without. So you have the slightest bit of empathy, the slightest bit of like self-centered empathy in Joe Rogan that recognizes that if somebody can do that to that guy, they can do it to you. And that's the whole point of any of it. That's the whole reason anyone gets due process, is because if anyone is denied that, then any semblance of a system that gives people a chance falls apart. So we're at that point. And Joe Rogan advocated for this. And I don't know how we can, try to get it through the heads of people like this, people who are relatively earnest, like Joe Rogan. I'm sure some of you will disagree with that. But I mean, over the years, he has not held a consistent Republican bipartisan line. I mean, he's getting more consistent with his conservative takes. But it seems to be the thought process of an earnest person who's just easily fooled. And how do you get it through the head of a person like that, that not only is it bad, it's great that you recognize that due process being deprived of people, anybody, even especially the least privileged in the country, because if they start depriving those people of their due process, that means they got some pretty nefarious plans. That's really what we're talking about. But great that you understand due process is important. Now, how about some understanding for the fact that you empowered this, even before we take more steps back and we talk about the racism and the propaganda, the flooding of propaganda that Joe Rogan participated in, that is, pretty similar to, it's the same methodology that anti-Semites used in Nazi Germany to ultimately lead to the extermination of the Jews. That was not singularly Hitler who did that. It was a growing sense that Hitler contributed to and fed and allowed the environment to thrive for, and then he ultimately spearheaded his final solution. But there were many, many people, media outlets, and different sources across Europe that were participating in that. And it's a very, very similar tone being struck by the Trump administration and many of his supporters. And so for the people in that support base that are not outright Nazis, which I believe Joe Rogan is not an outright Nazi, despite the fact that he does consort with them a concerning amount, and maybe he's getting closer and closer to that territory. Where is the recognition that if Trump is depriving people of their First Amendment rights, their constitutional rights, due process, not only is that bad for me and for you and for all of us, but it's really bad that you allowed that to happen. And we see this from Dave Smith, and we see this from Joe Rogan. The lights are dimly starting to come on, that like the way they're going about this is bad for everyone. This is democratic decay, rapid democratic decay of democracy. And so they're starting to get that a little bit. They've been lost in this fog that, Joe Biden is being puppet mastered by the real destroyers of democracy like George Soros. And so voting for a guy like Trump is the only way to get a singular guy who doesn't depend on anybody back in the White House, because he says what he thinks and he says what he believes. So even though I don't agree with everything he says, and even though he's, this or that, he at least isn't the same as the cabal. That's the mindset these people are coming from. And so they're dimly starting to realize, the supposed cabal was not doing this. And yeah, we could talk about Biden's draconian policy towards Gaza, or his immigration policy, or the fact that he was doing similar things when it comes to trying to revoke visas of people participating in Palestinian protests. Biden did some of that as well. He laid the groundwork for it. But what Trump has done is aggressively pursue the decay of democracy by those means. He is aggressively pursuing that. This is somebody who has no interest in maintaining any type of social contract in America. And that may be that social contract, the thing that keeps us all going to work and sort of, fighting for our own families. That's like one of the last things that's holding us together here. And Donald Trump is attacking it directly. That's what somebody does when they want to collapse society in a way that's bad, in a way that's not going to lead to revolution, in a way that's going to lead to bad things for everyone. So as the lights dimly start to come on amongst the people who loudly advocated for Donald Trump, I'm wondering when does it get to the point, what's it going to take for people to recognize that they have empowered something truly evil? And somebody left a comment recently that said, also comparing to Hitler and saying that many of the supporters of Hitler never admitted they were wrong. They never turned on him. And that's probably most likely when it comes to supporters of Trump. And that's probably true. There's probably not that much hope that figures like Rogan or idiots, even bigger idiots like Dave Smith, are ever going to really admit they were wrong. Dave Smith has at least said that he will admit he's wrong if Trump turns out to be a warmonger president. Joe Rogan has not made any deals like that. But he, like I said, he seems to be consciously working his way through this stuff. And one just wonders how far that goes. Joe Rogan has flip-flopped a lot throughout his career. He doesn't seem to have very firmly held beliefs, but every now and then his conscience gets to him a little bit. I'm also reminded of when he got in trouble for all the times he said the N-word over the years, and there was this big mashup of him saying the N-word with the hard R over and over and over and over again. And these were, things that were clipped over the years of him, whatever he was saying, referencing things or whatever. But even he admitted, that looked bad. He said that felt bad. I didn't like how that felt to watch that video of myself. So there's a sense of conscience in Joe Rogan. Am I saying that he's ever going to, turn his enormous capacity for free speech toward the greater good? At this point, almost certainly not. He's a force for evil. But I guess that's what, if Joe Rogan's not going to recognize that, that's what I want as many people to take themselves through as possible, is if what the Trump administration is doing is evil in terms of depriving people their rights, deporting innocent people, rounding up as many people as possible without due process, if that's evil, that means that Joe Rogan advocated evil. And until he turns around and apologizes profusely for advocating that evil, Joe Rogan is effectively evil. That's where we're at. That is where we're at. That's the stakes of politics. That's just the reality. Now, Joe Rogan's numbers do seem to be waning a little bit. We'll see what happens. He's been big for a long time. That means he could continue to be big and the biggest into the future. It also could mean that maybe he peaked at some point. There's other people that are at least attempting to knock him off the throne, like the Midas Touch Network, which is a liberal network. Now, look, I think it's great if Joe Rogan's intrigue is waning a bit. People like Kyle Kalinske have been really digging into him about his hypocrisy when it comes to supporting Trump and just how sort of spineless he is. And that seems to have made a dent. There's at least some audience crossover there. And Kyle Kalinske comes off as very authentic. So his critique of Joe Rogan comes off very authentic as well. So I'm not saying that Kyle did that, but there do seem to be some interesting things happening with Joe Rogan's audience. Not all of them, I think, are on board with the Trump stuff fully, or at least maybe many of them are more quickly catching on than Joe Rogan himself is. But as for whether the Midas Touch or somebody else can knock him out in terms of influence, maybe. I don't know if the Midas Touch boys are the ones to do it. I mean, I'll probably cover them at some point because I'm interested in the fact that they are becoming competitive with that. But also I think that they First of all, they're trying to build like a media operation, so their podcasts work well. The reason Joe Rogan is so fucking rock solid when it comes to his audience and his consistency is that it's just him. It's a simple operation. It's him and his producer, and they do the podcast, and there's not a lot to the operation other than that. And that is an extremely consistent way to run a business like this. And so the Midas Touch stuff, they want to build a big network. They want to be, competitive with mainstream news and with Joe Rogan. That would be fine. Do we need more like milquetoast liberals dominating the media space? We really don't. It would be great for someone like Joe Rogan to be knocked out or knocked down a few pegs. But I think one thing that Joe Rogan understands, one thing that the detractors and the competitors of Joe Rogan don't grasp in terms of his popularity and why his shit works is the fact that it's lifestyle oriented. And I know that's cheesy because it's like everything's lifestyle content and stuff like that. But the reason Joe Rogan has more cultural impact is because he's not just appealing to people who are looking to find information on the computer and people who are trying to find political content to like pass the time. Joe Rogan appeals to more people that are whatever, working out, or they're out doing their thing. They're less online. So even though Joe Rogan is online and he talks about online things, he also has that sort of offline mentality because he does other shit like fighting or comedy or whatever. He's in other worlds. And so I think that's where his resonance comes from. It's not just that people agree with what he says or even think that he's that smart of a guy. It's that he's good at that format of content and he does it in a way that appeals to people's lifestyle. You can listen to this at the gym. You listen to it on the way to work. That's the appeal of podcasts in general. So I think if we want to really start to catch back some of that cultural sway, we got to focus a little bit more on that. Like things that really resonate in people's lives and things that people can live with and grow with and just sort of have with them as they do other things. And at least if we're talking in terms of competing with Joe Rogan, I think that's the only way to go. That's the reason he has the appeal that he has, is because he's one guy who does his podcast, and that podcast reaches all kinds of people with all kinds of different lifestyles. And so until we can match him on that terrain, he's gonna keep beating us. I'm just being real. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you really want to support, also consider becoming a member. I'm posting different kinds of exclusive content there, whether it's like podcasts that don't get posted on the main page or also book reviews. I did a book review of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's exclusive. That's real cool. I'm gonna do more stuff like that. I'm experimenting a little bit and trying to figure out how to work it into my content schedule. I'm also posting beats there, songs. I got an EP coming out called Dead Internet Theory that is going to be available first as members only content. I'm also probably going to start a Patreon soon and post all the same stuff there as well. So stay tuned for that and let me know if there's anything else that you'd like to see that you think would be cool as exclusive content.